Thank you, everyone. This is joint work with my colleague here, David Card, and Patricia Funk and Nagore Iriberi. So let me just go straight to the motivating question. Economics, unfortunately, has nothing to be proud of in terms of diversity of the kind of group of authors and published people. In particular, gender differences have become even more salient recently when an undergraduate at Berkeley, Alice Wu, sort of brought to bear the really toxic environment for female economists on EJMR, which is his online platform. And so David Card and I had been working on trying to bring to bear evidence from 4 journals that chose transparency and sort of shared in some anonymized way information on submissions and referees and editor decisions. And so that we worked hard for the next year and so on to add information on gender of authors and referees to try to figure out, can we bring some evidence to bear in areas where there is a tremendous amount of kind of controversy, but at least we could put some more facts on the table that we can maybe agree on to move on to the next step. And this is this project. So here are some 3 main questions we can look at. The first one is, we call it the audit design. Do male and female referees see differently male authored and female authored paper, that kind of 2x2 sort of design. The second one, and I'll motivate why this may not be where you want to stop, even though it is a good design. The next step would be, well, for some things you might want to have a measure of quality more directly, and we're going to take citations with pros and cons of that and ask the questions, do referees undervalue female author papers compared to male author papers on this particular quality metric? And the third one is, well, referees do the first step, but then editors ultimately decide. What do editors do building on the referees? That's precisely the value of having spent years to put together this data set, which has the various steps of decision making and follows up with citations later. So now, here are some questions that mostly I'm not going to get into today. The first one is this kind of assortative assignment, which provides some indirect evidence of how editors think of papers, informativeness of different referees, desk rejection, speed of editorial decision. I'll try to get to some of this, but a lot of it will be left in the paper, which is on our website if you're interested in. Okay, so let me tell you a bit about the data. So 4 journals, which are among the kind of top journals in economics, the Quarterly Journal of Economics, the Review of Economic Studies, the Review of Economics and Statistics, and the Journal of European Economic Association, chose the path of transparency, which I want to say is really a positive sign for our discipline, because it was sort of a difficult process, but fraught with risks. So I want to raise that. They share data on basically all their submissions from when they had electronic record all the way up to recent years. And the information contains the ultimate editorial decisions. So about a little bit less than half get desk rejected of the papers, and the R&R rate unconditional is a little below 10%, just to give an idea if you're not an economist. And importantly, we have information on what the referees say on a 7-level scale, from like strong reject, which you never want to hear about your papers, but we tend to the one that you do want to hear about your paper, but nobody hears about, because accept recommendations is like 1% of recommendations. So anyway, so these are the different layers, and then there is some information on fielded submission, and then we also have some measure of how previously published these authors that are the submitters are. Is this somebody who has a track record or not? And then importantly, we're going to have Google Scholar citations later. This is why we stopped the sample in 2013, not because we don't have the more recent years, but we need enough time, at least 1.5 years minimum, so that the citations would be any decent measure of quality. And this will play a role in today's paper. So the gender coding, we spend a lot of time. We use first names. We code for the ones where it's not completely clear. Say you call Chris, that could be male and female. We sort of code the exact name. So we're quite confident about the accuracy of our gender coding. We have a pre-analysis plan, which we're following to the letter. And we also complement this with, which I'm not going to talk about today really, but we also collected expectations about the results along the lines of what we're doing tomorrow. Okay, so let me show you the first audit type results. So this is like, think about 4 kinds of papers. The papers that have all male authors, the papers that have all female authors, those are clear to categorize. But a lot of papers are in the mix mixed gender teams, and we categorize whether the more published author is female, which is the minority of cases, or male. So this is why you got 4 gender groups, which we'll see throughout. This is kind of was pre-specified, but we also augmented as a pre-specified specification that was going to go through the survey. So we can talk some more about this, but kind of we consider these aspects. And then what we can do for each of the papers, for the ones that have both a male and a female referee, we can say, hey, how did the male referee think about this paper? How did the female referee think about this paper? So, for example, these bars are saying, of the male author papers, what share of the male referees like the paper? You can see how high that bar is, like 20%. This is how grumpy referees are. And this is the female referees. There's no difference here. And then you compare that to the all-female authored or the mixed gender. This is really a pretty precise null effect, meaning, and you can look at this next regression if you like that better. This is basically the female author times female referees. This is actually a sequence of precise nulls, which is female referees are actually neither tougher nor easier on papers than male referees, and they're not tougher or easier on female author papers compared to male author paper. So this is kind of a set of, I would say, pretty precise zeros. Okay, so now there is some good news here, which is, in a way, this is different than the animus finding of Alice Wu on EJMR. We don't have the text of the reports, but at least it doesn't look like the papers that get rejected by female authors is because the male referees are obnoxious with respect to them compared to the female referees, because they're being equally positive or negative, however level you want to code it. So it's not that interaction, the match of gender. But, by the way, this is important because some people think it's really important to bring in more female referees, but that goes to add a lot of public good provisions in ways that may not, in this particular case, help you. The objective is to help with kind of increase the share of published papers that are, that are coming in from non-male submitters. But I want to say this is not necessarily the test you want to have. What if, for example, female author papers are of higher quality for a number of reasons? Maybe they're on more interesting topics, they're better specified, they respond better to referee comments, whatever reason you want to have, and both male and female referees underappreciate that. In this case, you wouldn't find anything from the audit test, but if you had a measure of quality, you could look at it directly. And that's what we're going to do with citations. That's our next step. Okay, so we have a model of this, and the idea of the model is citations are not a perfect measure of quality. We can all agree on that. So at minimum, it's a noisy measure of quality. Worse, it could be a measure that systematically is biased. For example, it could be the more prominent authors get more cites for the same level of quality. Okay? And the worry that is particularly important here is what if, for a given quality, female authors get fewer cites? Because that's going to directly impact our measure of quality, biasing towards female authors. So there's nothing magical we can do about it, but what we did do at least is we surveyed a group of economists, stratified male, female, and more published, less published, to kind of get a sense of how big do you think, we pretty much asked them straight out, what do you think is this disconnect between quality and cites comparing male author and female author papers? And most respondents thought it was between like 0 and 10%, so fairly not too large, but almost all agreed that if there was a bias, it was going against the female author papers. So keep that in mind, that you can actually add that bias onto the next result. It's just keep in mind we thought about this, and now I'm going to put it as a parenthesis because I'm going to move on and just look at citation. But if you wanted, you can do the translation from citation to quality. You might want to add in a bias. So here's the key figure, if you want to look at that. What is this figure? So the y-axis is basically citations controlling on a bunch of observables. I need to control because female economists have a different number of work in different fields, have a different numbers of previous publications. So we had pre-specified that we would do our analysis on gender conditional on the axis, not unconditional. We have the unconditional results in there too. And What this shows you then, this is the residual of arc sin h. Y arc sin h is kind of log basically, but log of 0 doesn't exist. So this is one of the transformations you could do. This is immaterial. So think of this as log points of citations on the y-axis. On the x-axis, you have a referee recommendation. So say that you get back your paper, and your paper has a recommendation of definitely reject. So it's going to be one observation here, and the recommendation of R&R is going to be an observation here. Okay? And so first of all, I want to show you that referee recommendations are positively correlated with citations. So it does seem like, and this is not just mechanical because you can control for publication, but in general, this monotonic slope, and it's one of the key findings we have in the previous work on this. But most importantly, how does that differ for female authors versus male authors versus mixed gender papers? This is this red line that lies above. Those are the female author papers. So those are the ones that, the one group that kind of is set aside from the others are the ones that are authored by all female authors, which are about 20 log points higher. So how would you interpret that? What that kind of means is that in order for a referee to say, okay, weak R&R, the female author papers would appear to need to be about 20 log points higher cites later, therefore 26 log points higher citations, to get the same referee approval. So this, on its face, will be evidence of discrimination against female author papers. So this is what the regression, this is what the regression is, also for the statistical significance. Controlling for all the variables, the dependent variable is kind of log citations. And you can see that the mixed gender groups, it's kind of pretty close to, this one is close to 0, this one is kind of in between. The key finding is this 22 log points, which has got a T of like 4.5, so it's statistically clearly significant. Our interpretation of that would be, it looks like referees, both male and female, are setting a higher bar on female author papers. This is and the mixed gender we can talk about. We can't reject that the mixed. This one is halfway between that and 0, but kind of more to that on the paper. Okay. So now, what about editors? Now, what could editors do? Editors could make this worse. Could undo it. Turns out editors mostly defer to the referees. So this pattern is not coming from the editors. The editors basically there's a very high R-square. Basically, for the ones of you that think, at least in economics, editors are really activists, they're not. Editors largely are following the referees. Even on this variable, they're just saying, okay, the referees say R&R, we go for it. If they say reject, they reject. So what that means, though, is that if the referees are all being tough on female authors, well, that's going all the way through. So we can compute what that means. So this is kind of maybe the other key graph in the paper. This is the advantage of having written down a model is we can say, what if referees had taken our measure of cites as the normative one? If you had removed that 22 log point bias, so if the referees had instead acted optimally to that, how much more would the R&R rate be for female author papers? It would go from the one in the data of about 12% of females submit female author papers get an R&R, it would go to 19%. And actually it would go to 21 if you added that quality citation difference. So this is a pretty big impact for what it would look like. It could be a significant contributors in the pipeline of careers of female economists. Even if most papers submitted by female authors are in the mixed gender categories, this is kind of big enough that if you take it all together, it would increase the R&R rate by 1.5 percentage points, which is clearly sizable. So I have a lot of robustness in the paper. I don't have much time, so let me just list some of the other things that we do and then conclude, I think, in time. Okay, so here are some things that some other things we find, all pre-specified. One is, there was a lot of concern, partly the work that stimulated a lot of us to work on it by Erin Hengel, let's say, on speed. We do not find, and her work suggests, based on published data from one journal, Econometrica, that it looks like referees are kind of being extra harder female author papers so that the revision lasts longer. We're not finding that. We find that both the referee speed, the editorial speed, the resubmission all looks gender neutral. That's sort of one outcome. On desk rejections, we actually find that it looks like that part where the editors don't have referees, that they're independent, that actually editors desk reject female author papers conditional on all the other variables a little less. So actually it's as if they're seeing that quality differential. It's just when they go, but not quite enough to fully undo it, but when the referee reports come in that they then go with it. So this is kind of interesting and maybe a little bit encouraging. And the final thing for the editors, the other thing with the editors do is they get reports from male referees and from female referees. And we have a way to measure how informative the two reports are, how correlated they are with citation. Turns out they're equally informative, male and female referees, and editors put the same weight on them. Now, this is not obvious because in the previous paper we find that instead we have a violation of this in the other way, that we find that referee reports from more published authors are equally informative as reports from less published authors, but editors put more weight on the more published referees. So we could have found the difference, but we don't. So let me wrap up. So the good news is journals chose transparency in economics, and I want to say again, that's really, we're grateful for that. And there is some positive news on this audit strategy, on the delays. But the bad news is if you think the citations are meaningful like we do, then there is some way that we don't know exactly what in which there is this differential bar. It could be direct discrimination towards kind of female author papers. It could be that there is some characteristics of papers, that female authors tend to write different kinds of papers, and referees are tough against those papers, not because they want to be tough against female authors, but they happen to be because they're correlated. In practice, these are going to have some similar implications. So my very last slide in particular as to what one could do. The first one is we don't think that having more female referees helps, and it gives more non-promotable tasks, in the words of Linda Babcock and the co-authors. What we think could be a really good idea is to track data like this. Like transparency is good here too. You know, if journals track this information, we can reanalyze this 5 to 10 years down the line. And Joe Price and Justin Wolfers with Devin Pope found that a pattern of discrimination they found among MBA referees basically seemed to go away at the moment that you publish the results. So maybe that's going to be enough. Double-blind reviews, we're not huge fans. We think it's extremely hard to do at this day and age. And on top of it, it would not solve interpretation 2, where it's characteristics of the paper, but it's not gender. Okay, thank you very much. Don?
It's really a brilliant presentation. Can I ask you, would it be possible to do more of the kind of quality evaluation that you see, for example, in the fine arts, where you have the violinists playing behind the curtain? Couldn't you just take a group of people who do not know the papers and have them read the papers as they were submitted and rate their quality, and just assess whether there's any, controlling for the objective, blinded assessment of quality, the ratings of the reviewers were especially harsh or congenial?
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. I'm aware of the really important work where you do like behind the curtain, so you know who's playing. We don't know of any design that has actually done it, but that's a potential direction of research we should think about. Yeah, you need it to be not too small because the effects are not, the R&R effects are big for careers, but you would need to be quite well powered to do this. And I wouldn't want to do this with deception. So you could but you could do revealing the gender or not. That you could do. So yes, that's something we could think about.
Your effect is all on the purely female authors. You ask whether the effect is there.
Yeah. No, one could do that. Andy?
So, I didn't. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the selection on publication seems prominent to me. Obviously, it's something you've thought about, but it just seems to me, you're accepting 20%. You're picking up the ones that somehow the editor thought, based on the referee reports, were worth reviewing, and then there's the revision process itself, which is endogenous to all of this. So does that not matter or potentially matter for what you're trying to say?
So let me just take the second part of your question. So it's very important to correct for the mechanical bias. It's just getting an R&R increases citations. That we actually have a control function approach for handling that. We really tried kind of pretty hard, and behind the veil of like putting up the best on this, but we're all for, basically one of the things we do is a call for action, like look, we need more papers that try to use data to address issues like this as opposed to instead kind of speculating about it without data. And so I agree there's a lot more than one could do. And we can talk some more about the exact suggestion you had. Yes?
Isn't it conceivable that there could be no discrimination, but that all female teams are more responsive to an R&R, so you get a like higher quality bump that way?
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. So that, the second way to interpret results, there's characteristics of papers. It could just be that male economists just don't listen very much, and female economists listen and improve the papers. Now, even if that's the channel, we have to backward induct, and we should be knowing that ex ante, and that should go part into knowing that instead we're too hard against the female economists. I am not saying that is the channel. I am saying that there is a number of possible ways if the papers are higher quality and we don't know exactly what it is. But sort of knowing that we should be aware as an editor, if two papers are on the margin, I don't know exactly what's going on, but if they're on the margin, I should be saying, hey, for this group of authors somehow ends up producing better papers exposed citation-wise, I should keep that in mind. Yes?
Sorry,
Mary.
your suggestion that the market of economists might automatically correct with more information is definitely supported by much research in economics, much less in political science. So I'm just wondering if you have any policy suggestions on the basis of this, of these research findings.
Yeah, that's Mira, thank you for that question. We don't necessarily know that information would correct this. Our point is that information is a helpful first step. And actually, the editors have been so disposed to this that it took the risk of saying, okay, the only condition they put is that we don't disclose results by journal, which makes sense. So we don't know if this is going to solve it or not, but I think that's a kind of at least a hope that having these results out there would lead us to having some constructive suggestions. And we're hoping that the editors and referees reading this might keep that in the back of their mind. And again, we don't know for sure, but the Price and Wolfers and then Pope story is really interesting in suggesting some of that may be going on. But we're open. I mean, we don't know for sure, but we would hope 5-10 years from now to reanalyze and see where things are then. Thank you.